Welcome to Making It Happen, a career in the performing arts, where we discuss how to break into the performing arts industry for yourself or your child, teen, or young adult. Guests include professionals who are passionate and share my vision of helping talented individuals land professional representation and have successful careers in the arts. My name is Leesa Csolak, and my guest today is Dan Rosales. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Hey Lisa, I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm enjoying this nice crisp fall weather that we're having, honestly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been great. So I am really thrilled about talking to you today, because your journey, I think, is really going to be a great kind of informational story journey that you can share
Yeah.
with the listeners. And as I mentioned to you previous, our listeners are primarily parents of talented kids, teens, and young adults, and also young adults who are in college, and some who have graduated, and even older adults who have been in the city maybe for 8, 10 years and are lost and never really found that agent, that manager, got connected to the right people. So
Right.
yeah, I'm interested to kind of hear all about your journey to Broadway, because you are presently
In the
on.
Great Gatsby. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and many times starring in this, performing the starring roles, which is so crazy and exciting. But we'll get there. So
Yeah.
my first question is, can you talk about your beginnings? Like, when did you know that you were talented, that you had interest in this, that there was some kind of spark in you? Was it your parents? Was it a teacher? Like, did you just know when you were super young? Like, when did it all start?
Yeah. I guess I'll take you back to the very beginning. This all kind of stemmed out of a place of necessity. When I was really young, my parents split up. So after school programs were paramount to like keeping me
Hmm,
busy and keeping me at school and focused on something else. So the
sure.
first programs that were available to me were the choir program, were after school drama programs. So I think it started as early as elementary school. I got involved in some theater troupe where we danced a terrible routine to the Men in Black theme song. And I think that was my first performance in the basement of a church. I remember it being all dressed in black, baggy clothes that were too big for us. And it's literally since that moment, I literally think that's when I got bit by this, you know, acting bug, like the need to perform and just the love of it all. When I got to middle school, I had the choice of joining all of I transferred to my middle school, so all of the programs electives were already full except for a few. And I think the two choices remaining were color guard and choir. And the way color guard was explained to me when I was in the office, I have a vivid memory. She was like, "Oh, you get to run around with rifles and like play in the field." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm a 12-year-old kid. That sounds amazing. I'd love to do that."
Right.
First day of color guard, I got there. It was all girls who were much taller than me, and they were all like super athletic and like waving these flags around. I was the only boy, and I was
Oh
so
no.
intimidated that I ran back to the office. I'm like, I don't think this is right for me. Is choir still available? And
Nice.
it was. And so I joined the choir, and since that moment, something unlocked in me where I just found like a passion for singing and
Hmm.
found my way into the arts like that way. And ever since then, I consider myself like a vocalist first. I've always been a vocalist first, and then I loved the acting side of it, and then I got involved in the dance side of it. So that's how I found my way into like musical theater that way.
Okay, interesting. Yeah,
Mm.
so that's interesting because I always ask people, even people when I'm working with them, how do you identify? Like, how do you identify? What do you identify with first? And it's interesting. Was there one teacher that inspired you in that way, that you knew, like, were they giving you compliments, giving you opportunity to do solos in the choir, um, that type
Yeah.
of thing? Like, how did you know that you were that good? Because I know a lot of times especially in grammar school, when you have someone who can, in this case, sing really well, the teachers are
Mhm.
trying to make everybody blend. And so sometimes I find that there are children who will hold back and they won't
Right.
really perform what they really know how to do, that their God-given talent doesn't come out, because the
Right.
teachers, of course, their job is to teach the whole group, and they
One
don't want
voice.
someone to
Right.
stand out. Like, what was your experience when you first started and you found that you had that voice?
Yeah, I mean, well, similarly, like in elementary and middle school, it was all about that group feeling, right? It was like having just
Mm,
one voice and singing as one
yeah.
and kind of honing your skills throughout those classes. It wasn't really until I got to high school and my high school drama teacher, her name is Cameo Fasulo. Cameo, perfect name for a high school drama teacher. Who's also the dance instructor. And it wasn't until I got to like high school theater. And it sounds a little silly to say, but that I really recognized that I had something different that wasn't just an elective or something that I was doing at school. And she kind
Hmm.
of brought that out of me in a way that she told me. She was like, look, it's great that you're doing community theater here in high school and you're doing the high school plays, but you need to be right now you're like a big fish in a small pond. You need to go be a big fish in the ocean and you need to
Hmm.
go study this. You need to go
Hmm.
to school for this if you want to, because you have the talents to really make it work. And so at her urging, I had started to look into it more seriously. And I, applied to a bunch of theater programs. I got into a lot of them. And I, it it stemmed from her really encouraging me that way, that she noticed something that was a gift that could be something more, could be a career.
I think you do need someone who is a professional or semi-professional to give you kind of that push, especially for
Totally.
parents, because they feel like it's my kid. Of course they're good. Of course I'm going to think they're good because I'm
Of
biased.
course.
Are they really good? Like, what's the real story here? And I hear that all the time, where people are like, are my kids really ready for this? I don't know. But did you start doing any training with professional teachers, like private instruction as a
Yeah.
child, teen? Did you do it at that time or you waited till
I
college?
did. No, I waited. I as soon as I kind of knew that there was something more, and I happened to be I was cast in everything, and I was doing everything, and then I
Okay.
started to get attention from like the local theater community, and
Mm-hmm.
where I'm from, Thousand Oaks, California. There's a huge regional touring house there. It's usually like the
Mm-hmm.
second or third national tour that comes through there, but it's like a 3,000 seat house, I think. Our regional theater there, like we would put up shows. I did a bunch of regional shows there that was more than community theater, because it was elevated.
Mm-hmm.
And through that community that I found in high school, I started taking uh, professional voice lessons that weren't at school, wasn't in choir, through a voice teacher. His name was Paul Fagundes. Shout out to Paul if somehow you hear this. But he was the first like real voice teacher that I had that was like, oh, this is how you warm up. This is how you cool
Mm-hmm.
down. This is how you stretch your voice. This is
Mm-hmm.
some repertory that you should sing. We are going to do like a class concert at some venue. And he had all his students perform. And it was my first recital ever of me singing some very stereotypical tenor musical theater songs. But it was
Right?
great. It was so necessary to have that type of training and that type of teacher that was like, you can do this, you want to do this, so I'm gonna put all of this information in front of you and you do with it what you will, and hoping
Mm.
that something sticks. And it did, luckily. And that kind of opened the door for me to start working professionally, no longer as like a student actor, but hired on contract at those regional theaters that were, I remember working with like Sally Struthers and Debbie Gibson
No,
when I was 16, 17.
no way. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you had that opportunity so early. You know what I think is great? One thing that you mentioned about that teacher is that and this happens, I think, quite often when you get with an instructor, a teacher, coach who is in the industry in that regard or at a higher level, like in the Broadway space, and they give you opportunities right away. Like you're saying, you had a recital, or, sometimes it's a cabaret someone puts together or whatever. And I think that's opportunities to go, okay, now things are on the line here. This isn't like, this is no joke. Like you have to bring it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's a whole different situation. And when you started that instruction, did you feel like a fish out of water, or was it just something natural that you felt like, okay, this is where I belong. I get this guy. Like how did it feel just as the performer when you started with that more advanced teacher?
Right. I think looking back on it, Dan, I want to say now that, oh, yeah, it felt so easy and it was fine because now I'm so used to it. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
starting it back then, there was a little trepidation, be like, what's happening? What is this? why am I paying so much money for this? Am I good at
Hmm.
this? There's a
Yeah.
lot of the
Yeah.
shoulda, coulda, is like when you first start there. And then it kind of quickly went away when we just started doing, the work, which is
Hmm.
really cool because the kind of that inner voice shuts up and you're just like, I want to get better at this. Oh,
Yeah.
this was really good this time. Not so great in this way this time, but my next voice lesson, I'm going to work on this phrase so I can really so it
Hmm.
kind of it's that inner saboteur that like kind of talks you down from like, I don't think you should be doing this. I don't even think you should be doing this, but you're good enough to push past it and
Yeah.
be like, oh, actually, I am pretty good at this. So I
Hmm.
think it's a mix. It felt right once I was critical of myself in the way that I wanted to get better and not just
Yes.
thinking the best at it, you know?
Yes, isn't that so true? I feel like when you're a beginner, you think you're really great. And then
Yeah.
when you get to that intermediate level, you have to get over this hump of like, okay, like exactly what you said, that you love it and you want to get better. And you kind of have this, I think, an inner voice saying, no, I can do this. I'm going to do it.
It propels and it still propels me to this day. It's like, what can I improve upon this last time? Because I mean, perfection is impossible and unattainable, but practice makes perfection or practice makes, performance better. It's just that constant need to improve upon what you've just done in a way that's attainable.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you just said that. Let's jump to now, just because of what you
Yeah,
just said. Okay. Let's jump to today, just
sure.
for a second. Okay. So I'm going to let you talk about Gatsby. But how I want to relate it is now you are in a Broadway show, a very big, epic Broadway show, and you're not only part of the ensemble, but you are understudying big lead roles. So now talk about that and how you prepare, and are you continuing to train, and how does that relate to what you learned when you were younger?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I'm going to take you through the whole Gatsby situation. So I came about my Broadway debut in a very weird way. And I'm not sure actually if you know this, but I was actually Mark Bruni is the director of The Great Gatsby on Broadway, and we had met years ago previously when I was in final callbacks for the Beautiful tour, for the first national tour, which he
Okay.
directed, and ended up going my way, which was fine, which is great. It was a learning experience. But then I met him again when we did this off-Broadway musical called Trevor, which is about a young kid coming to terms with, you know, his desires and his changing body and his queerness as a young kid in a rural town. And I was the dance captain and the adult male swing for that. There were only two adult male roles, so I covered the two adults in that show.
Sidebar,
And
I have to
yeah,
interrupt you a second. Sidebar.
yeah.
So one of my clients from when she was very, very young, she was like 4 or 5 years old when I got her signed with a bicoastal, big, big bicoastal agent. Echo Pacone was in
Oh
that
yeah,
show.
of course,
Yeah.
Echo. Yes. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
she's so
Yeah.
talented, so lovely.
Right?
Yeah.
With the red hair. Yeah, with the red curls. Like she's amazing.
Yes.
I can't believe she's, like a senior in high school now. It's crazy.
I know it's
But
crazy.
anyway, yeah, we should talk more about Trevor because that's kind of a big deal. But go ahead, go on with your story.
Yes. So Mark was the director for that, and through a weird series of circumstances, I ended up becoming the resident director for that production off Broadway, along with being the dance captain and being in the show, like noting the show when I was noting the show as dance captain, but also as the director, a resident director, excuse me. And then another huge COVID surge hit, Omicron. Remember that?
Yes.
That was awful, and it
Yes.
closed a bunch of
Yes.
shows. We were unfortunately one of the shows that closed.
I
Um,
remember that. I remember that.
yeah,
That's a great opportunity though to be acting as the director.
yeah, it was amazing. And so
That's huge.
Mark then, had another job opportunity for me. He was doing the show called 50 Years of Broadway at the Kennedy Center, which is huge, huge, like A-list Broadway talent singing the songs that made them famous. LaShawn's, Norm Lewis, Stephanie J. Block. It was huge names in the
Oh,
theater.
wow. Okay.
And he asked me to be his associate director for that production. So I was like, you know what? Trevor just closed. I have nothing going on. This is always something that's been interesting to me. I've never necessarily felt a calling to be a director or something like that, but I love theater in all its forms. So I'll go work at this iconic Kennedy Center
That's
for,
incredible. Do you feel like, I don't know, like the universe was kind of calling you to head in that direction at all during that time?
It's so funny you say that because so getting back to Gatsby, so I did that production, right? And then the first time I ever heard about The Great Gatsby was when Mark again asked me to be his associate director after we'd done a couple of projects together for this reading of The Great Gatsby, which was, a Broadway-bound musical. It hadn't found Jeremy Jordan or Eva yet. It didn't find its
Okay.
stars. It was just working on the material in the book. And so I agreed, and I read the stage directions, and I helped, kind of facilitate what an AD does in a reading, which is just a lot of admin work and bookkeeping and making sure
Yeah.
everything's I's are dotted and T's are crossed. As soon as it started to go forward, I knew that the paper mill production of Great Gatsby was happening because I had seen press about it.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark reached out to me. So a lot of very serendipitous things happened on one day. I booked the company national tour the same day that I had my final callback for The Great Gatsby in an ensemble track. But this is after Mark Bruni had emailed me asking me to be his associate. And so I was kind of torn, right? Because there's two very
Right.
divergent paths, similar but different. And the performer side of me was like, I've always wanted to do this. And this is like one of the closest shows that I know that has the potential, has the star power, has the
Yeah.
producing behind it to actually make it on Broadway, which I've always
Yeah.
dreamed of. I responded back very quickly to his email and very professional. I was like, Mark, I love working with you. I'm so grateful for all the opportunities that you've given me as a director and as an actor. Is it okay with you if we put a pin in being your associate? Because I just got an appointment from my agents the same day he asked me to be his associate to be in the show. And he was nothing but respectful. He was like, "Oh my
Okay.
God, of course, absolutely. I won't bias the team one way or another. I won't say anything, rooting for you to be in the show or rooting for you for not to be in
Right.
the show. Just know
Right.
that one way or another, we're happy to have you involved." And it was the biggest blessing of my life. So I ended up booking the company national tour on the last day of my final callback. I had forgotten my water bottle at Ripley Greer after I went to company after coming from Gatsby across the street. I went back to Ripley Greer upstairs and I saw Kate Kerrigan and Mark Bruni in the elevator. And I was like, oh my God, this is so awkward because I know them both. We've known each other for a long time, but
Oh
never
my
in a
gosh.
way where I was like, I was just your associate on a reading. And then I just went in for this ensemble and covering the lead role. So it got a little, I was like, and it all was amazing because as soon as we got out of the elevator, we were outside and they couldn't keep it in. They were like, "You're going to be in the show. You're going to be in the show." And I
Oh my
just remember
God.
like being outside of Pearl Studios, like starting to cry because it was just the universe was pointing me in the right direction, but only because I had been open and, receptive to all of the different opportunities that were presented my way, even if they weren't necessarily what I thought would be the first choice I would make or the best choice.
You know what? This is such an amazing story. I'm so glad you're sharing this because I feel like there I have so many adult clients that really are lost and they have a hard time because in their heads they see that, like my son Kurt coined, the golden castle on the hill,
Yeah.
Broadway, that they think that that's what they want and they want it so bad. And instead of like letting, loving the art form, loving all the opportunities, letting those doors open, and even if they're open, they're ajar and they sneak their big toe in and kind of get in and play over here and play over there, it
Right.
all, it's not a straight linear line to Broadway, I don't think, for anyone. And
No.
certainly it wasn't for you, but that's so exciting that, you know what you have to too, I think you have to look at with that situation you were in, everyone wanted you for
Yeah.
directing, for
It's
this national tour, for, like everyone wanted you, which is very exciting. And you have to kind of, when you're in those situations, I think it's very nerve-wracking,
absolutely.
um, because you don't want to burn any bridges and you don't want to make a mistake and you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And like you said, you want to be grateful. And it's wonderful that he gave you that opportunity and understood where you were coming from, which I think at the top of the industry, I think most directors, choreographers, creatives, they do understand that, you
Yeah.
have to kind of, feed that. And in that moment, I'm sure, I mean, when you were young, did you think of Broadway as something that, was like, oh, the Golden Castle? Or
It's so
was it
funny
just, I
because
love the art? Like, where was your head?
I think it was more I love the art and I have a good time doing what I'm doing when I was younger. Because for me, like I had never heard of the Jimmy Awards. I'd never really heard of a Broadway show. And
Hmm.
granted, we had some tours come through, but my family didn't really have the means to go take
Hmm.
all of us to go see a show that
Sure.
expensive.
Yeah.
So for me, it was just kind of like, oh, I'm doing this after school program and I'm good at doing it and it makes me happy. And in sort of that way of doing it. And then it wasn't until really I had started college and I moved to Boston. I started school at the Boston Conservatory that I was like, oh, there's a whole other world to unlock here. I mean, all of these Broadway shows, all of these famous actors and actresses and people I want to emulate. And I kind of fell in love with the theater like that way on the
Hmm.
opposite, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does make sense completely because I think there's a lot of people who, or a lot of children and teens who just find out exactly like what happened to you. You realize that, okay, I have this affinity, I have this talent, this God-given ability, and now it's being nurtured. And you just kind of live in the moment of what's coming at you. And, unless you're someone who is really a super fan of Broadway, and like you're saying, have parents and the means to go to Broadway shows. Like I know for my son Kevin, his first Broadway show was being in How the Grinch Stole Christmas at the age of 10. And
Oh,
he
yeah.
had been, you know what I'm saying? And he had been in so many theaters just with doing, he was a competition dancer first. So he had been in a lot of different theaters. And I remember we were going into, I think it's now the Lyric Theater. At the time it was the Hilton. And the first day in the theater, and we're the whole cast is going in. Of course, parents were there because he was a minor, and
Yeah.
he's like, "Wow, mom, this theater's pretty cool. The chandeliers are nice. Like the lights are cool." Like he had no idea. He just was so
Right.
used to living in backstage areas,
Yeah.
from when he was a baby, and he really didn't have any idea. And then, like yourself, when he got a little bit older, he thought, "Oh wow, this is like." There's a whole nother space here that I need to learn about, which is
Yeah.
another reason why a collegiate program is a great thing because there is an
Yeah.
academia to it, right? Like, so let's talk about Boston. How did you land there? Was that your first choice? Did you, because I also have many
Yeah.
young adult clients trying to get into school. I've had a
Of
college
course.
concierge program for years, you know what I mean? So like I help
Yes.
all people do that. And many times they're submitting, and now's the time, right? This is it
Yeah.
right
All the
now,
free screens. Yeah.
September, October, they're getting all their pre-screens done. And they've got 12, 15, 16, 18 schools on their list. Like, how was
Yeah.
that process for you?
It was a little different because I'm a millennial, so like we are at the advent of social media and everything, right? Like we got in, I think, at the right time,
Hmm.
fortunately.
Yeah,
But we didn't
agreed.
have many like pre-screens back when I was applying to school. Like we had unifieds, which you would go to a hotel. If you were from the West Coast, you'd go to LAX and you'd go to the LAX Hilton and it'd be a giant ballroom and every single top program would be there. And you'd go for a day or two and you'd sing, you'd dance, you'd bring your little boombox or bring a burned CD with your tracks on it.
That's
And you
right.
you would play it for them and you would sing. And the way I went about going to school was I actually went to a state school, to Cal State Fullerton for a semester. And that program ended up not being right for me. I think now they've really like honed in on what they're doing, but we were the first class, I think, for a BFA program. So it was kind of a little confusing when we first got there. And I decided to take the a year off. So I went back to my hometown. I worked at that theater that I was talking about. And I just took classes at a community college and kind of had a moment to was like, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to do this? Am I going to go to school for this? Do I go to school for something else and do this as a minor? And I was like, you know
Yeah.
what? I really want to do this. So I applied again to schools that I got into the first time.
Okay.
And the way that I chose my top choice was kind of like, how much scholarship money can I get? Because that was very important for me if I
Yeah.
got any. And by the grace of God, like Boston Conservatory gave me an incredible package. And so as soon as I got that email, I was like, well, this is my first choice. So it's great
That's
that I
great.
get my first choice.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, yeah. And it's so nice because you have Berkeley there and you have all the music,
Oh my
people,
gosh. I
students.
mean,
And I know they're like
yeah.
sister schools, right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your experience at Boston Conservatory because I think there are some students out there that aren't interested in the collegiate path. You know, they just want to jump
Yeah.
right to auditioning. And certainly some of them can, because in this, as going back to what you're saying now, with this world that is so small for all of us because of these tools that we have,
Mhm.
do have more access, right, to
Yeah.
training via Zoom, blah, 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 all of that.
Right.
And so they
Exactly.
want to skip it. So, like, give us a little bit of an idea how that training was for you, and how important it was for you, maybe people who inspired you along the way, that type
Right.
of thing.
I mean, I will always say that you will always find successful people in any industry that studied your chosen field and didn't study, and that went to a collegiate program for it and that did not go to it. Like, you have everyone across the board always. There's not one linear path to success in your chosen field. For me personally, I needed, in my young age, I needed a program, I needed a training center where I was forced to go to class, I was forced to go to school, and I that was essentially like a Broadway boot camp for me. I mean, I'm kind of dumbing it down a little bit. It's such a prestigious institution. It's the
Right.
oldest music school in the United States, and I think in the Northern Hemisphere, actually. Anyway, it was an incredible school, and I would not trade a single second of it. I met my dearest lifelong friends that I consider family now. And that alone was worth the price of admission. And along the way, I happened to get some also incredible training from people that are doing it professionally in Boston, people that worked at Boston Ballet, people that had been on Broadway, people that had been off Broadway. It was kind of, it ran the gamut of professional teaching artists that were at the school at that time. And I had never really seen, coming from my hometown, I'd never seen facilities like that were dedicated to just three things. It was music, dance, and theater, and that's
Yeah.
it. You
Yeah, it's
know,
pretty
it.
amazing what these schools offer. Yeah.
So for me, for what I needed, it was a perfect blend of finding myself as an individual in a big city alone for the first time, and also giving me this incredible toolbox of unlocking my voice, unlocking my
Mhm.
acting potential,
Mhm.
unlocking things in my body for dance and movement that I wouldn't necessarily have had the opportunity to if I decided to maybe do it a la carte, if you will, and do it myself, alone in a city. Not saying that that's not a feasible way to do it, but for where I was, I benefited so immensely from being around like-minded people in a class of people that were also going through the same thing, also getting the same tools, just using them in a different way and learning from watching them grow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. I was just going to interject that, yeah, you're with like items, you're with your tribe,
Yeah.
you're with people who also have those same aspirations and the love and the passion and the work ethic for that field, which is
Yeah.
what all collegiate programs are about, right? And the hope is
Mm.
that you can go to school for something that you love. Hence the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, to try to make parents understand, no, let your child who is talented try
Yeah.
this. They
Yeah.
can always get their undergrad in drama or voice, performance or musical
Yeah.
theater, and get a master's in another field. But
Exactly.
you have to give them a chance. And yeah, it's just, you're submersed, right?
But no, you're totally immersed in it, which I think was beneficial for me. And I think now, as it took me, I think, 10 years. I've been in the city for almost 11 years. It took me 10 years to get to Broadway, but those 10 years, I just, like, no one's path is the same, but those 10 years were filled with so many incredible opportunities. And just because I didn't reach that golden castle on the hill until the 10th year doesn't mean that those 10 other years weren't worthwhile. I was on TV. I was on two different TV shows. I led a national tour. I worked at the Ken, I did all of these incredible opportunities that sometimes get outshined by the glow of that castle, that are equally as important to your growth as an artist and your growth as a human being. And now I happen to be on that castle, which is an amazing place to be. But I'm
Yes.
looking at it from the lens of someone like, oh, this is actually more of the same. It just happens to be in New York. And now that I have all of these other experiences from doing that same thing, just not in New York City, it just becomes a job, a great job, but something that I'm
Yes.
prepared to do and something that I'm ready to do 8 times a week.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I love that. That needs to be like a billboard on the way to every MT building at college universities. No, because a lot of people feel like, okay, I went through this college program. My parents are like, I spent all this money on my child, and
Yeah.
now you want them to continue training. Now you want them to, continue to take voice lessons, dance, whatever it is. And they do. They feel like, why am I not on Broadway? Why isn't this a thing that just happens? And I think you make such a good point that, all of these things that you did led you to where you thought you wanted to ultimately be, possibly, or people think they
Yeah.
want to be. And then exactly what you just said, you get there and it's not much different from the other theaters. It's just,
Right.
it happens to be like this, everyone puts it on such a pedestal, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so true, like your development went in so many different directions, which honestly becomes very palatable
Mhm.
to the directors on Broadway, the creative teams on Broadway, because you know how to handle yourself in
Yeah.
so many different situations because you've developed as a very much an adult artist, and you don't always
Right.
see that. So I'm going
Totally.
to segue to something,
Sure,
if
sure,
that's
sure.
cool. I want to segue to
Sure.
something. Can we talk about the culture within, like the
Mm.
culture within a cast, the culture within a rehearsal room?
Mhm.
Maybe something that you experienced, or, there's some advice that you might have for people once they get there and they arrive.
Right.
It's always interesting to me, how people act and react once they book something. And maybe some people, we're all trained differently, and that's based
Yeah.
on the teachers and the people that we've had. And I very much was always someone who, when I'm working with people, I'm always trying to interject how this industry works and how their behavior needs to be a certain way, or that they need to, give respect in these moments, and in other moments kind of understand when they can ask a specific question, those types of things. And we talk about, obviously, the specificity of all of
Yeah.
that. But if you could kind of talk about, because of all these experiences you've had, what that has been for you. Like, what did you learn from, say, first project as a 16-year-old doing regional theater and getting paid for it, to now? And how did you develop all of that from those experiences? Something
Yeah.
along those lines would be great.
I think the thing that's always stuck with me, and it's because I started this. Everyone starts as a newbie, right? Everyone starts something for the first time. And so because I did this for the first time, I always treated it like I was a student. I was always a student and I was always learning something. So when I was in that gigantic rehearsal hall during tech and we were getting notes from the director, and even though I was the tiny ensemble part, and there was like, actually, can you do I had my notepad out. I was taking notes. I said yes. I listened. It's just I something that I take with me from those days is that I never want to feel like I'm always the smartest or the best person in the room. Someone always has something to teach me or to share. And I think that's so important. So something that I've taken from that little 16-year-old experience to now
Mhm.
is that I always enter a rehearsal room or a new project with ready to learn and willing to listen. And it's
Yeah.
just something that is so important because a lot of times if you have a certain amount of talent, you have a certain amount of expectations maybe. And
Yes.
so I just never let your ability to learn, you know, always let your ability to learn outweigh your expectations because, you might expect something else, but someone says something or you get a note from someone that you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way.
Yes.
Because it's so collaborative. Theater is so collaborative. And if you
Yes.
enter the one-minded process, you're going to butt a lot of heads along the
Hmm.
way, and it's not going to
Hmm.
be a full experience. Biggest thing that I've learned is to always just be ready to learn, ready to bounce ideas off of each other, be prepared, and just be kind. It's so easy to be kind. So easy to be kind.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all great points. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think too, you have to go into every project with a certain amount of respect that the
Yes.
producers are the people who are funding this, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, they are paying your salary if it's a
Hmm.
paid position, right? So they've been put at the helm for a reason. And then those producers have chosen the creative team for specific reasons that are very much about what they want their end product to be. And you, as the artist, can't always be privy to that. It's not
Exactly.
the lane you're supposed to be in, right? So I think Yes, once, and I totally agree with you. The whole collaborative process, like that's what I loved. Like I worked for Madonna for her 2012 world tour, doing some choreo for her. And that was such an amazing experience because everyone at that level knew the lane they were in, and yet those lanes crisscrossed and worked together to get us to that common goal in a very coordinated way. And you had to
Yeah,
understand and read the room to know that, okay, in this moment, I need to stay here. Now we're in a different setting and we're having a conversation, and they opened the door to me being able to give my opinion on the changes in the music and what the musical
yeah,
director was
yeah,
creating because of what I was writing. And that's what's beautiful. That's what's magic. And if you can be patient, if you are talented enough and you think, okay, one day I could be a creative, then
right,
be patient in those moments, stay in the lane,
right.
and read the room enough. So those skills, do you feel you learned those skills as a 16-year-old?
I think I started to learn those skills as a 16-year-old, and I'm still learning those skills because now, I've had the opportunity to work with people of name, people who are notable. And so part of that mindset is that I look at the people who are in the principal positions as people of power or people in star roles, and I'm like, how do they approach this? How do they talk to the director? How do they take notes? Are they receptive? Are they rebutting against it? Like how do I want to approach me starring in a Broadway show one day? And what is the type of performer and person and personality do I want to bring into that room? And what is the most fruitful version of that? What is the most unifying version that everyone is synchronous and the room is happy and everyone's laughing? So it's like taking things from every single job that I've done and shutting my mouth in somewhere I'm like, well, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to talk to a director that way. I'm never going to take a note that way. Or I'm never,
Yeah.
it's so everything is right in front of you if you just listen and hear it. And you can take everything from those experiences and shape it into something that now I'm starring on Broadway and covering two of the principal roles that I now bring into that of like how I treat my dresser, how I treat the resident director, how I treat the associate choreographer, and things like just how you want to be perceived as a human and an artist. They're so important, so important.
Yeah.
And it starts
Yeah.
from taking it from your first professional job. It's just taking little kernels of information and truth
Mhm.
and suggestions.
Thanks for watching the Making It Happen, a Career in the Performing Arts podcast. Tune in on Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern. And if you'd like to connect with Dan, go to danrosales.net and follow him on socials at Dan Rosales. Need more info and details about the professional performance industry? Visit lbctalent.com and schedule your free, no obligation consultation. And follow me on socials at Leesa Csolak _LBC Talent. By sharing our stories, we can help other talented individuals land the career of their dreams. If you're enjoying this podcast, please like and subscribe below and hit the bell for notifications.